For more than 30 years, Mary Austin lived behind the tall brick walls of Garden Lodge, wrapped in a silence the world could never understand. She turned down interviews, ignored tabloids, and refused to join the endless speculation about Freddie Mercury's final days. While journalists hunted for secrets, inventing confessions and lovers, Mary has stayed inside the home he had loved her, a home filled with the echo of music, laughter, and one unspoken truth that only she knew. Now, at 73, she finally breaks that silence. Her voice, calm yet trembling with memory, doesn't seek attention or redemption. She speaks not to defend herself, nor to rewrite history, but to remind the world of who Freddie truly was, the man she loved long before the myth was born. The truth she carries isn't scandalous nor shocking. It's something smaller, more fragile, and infinitely more human. It's about love, loyalty, and the final words whispered in the quiet hours before the music ended. As Mary walks through the hushed halls of Garden Lodge, her footsteps echo softly across marble floors still lined with Freddie's art, his photographs, his piano. Dust has settled on the keys, yet the air seems to hum with a familiar melody. She stops beside the instrument, her fingers brushing the cool ivory. The world may remember his voice, that impossible electric voice, but only she knows what he said when the last note faded into silence. London, 1970, a city pulsing with noise, youth, and rebellion. The air smelled of cigarette smoke and rain-soaked concrete. Rock music poured out of underground clubs, mingling with the sound of buses and laughter. And in a small boutique called Biba, a 19-year-old shop assistant named Mary Austin stood behind the counter, her eyes bright but her future uncertain. She earned just enough to pay rent, dreaming quietly of a life that felt bigger than her own reflection in the shop window. She had no idea that fate was about to bring someone through those glass doors, someone who would change everything. That afternoon, a young man stepped inside. He had sharp features, wild dark hair, and the quiet, magnetic confidence of someone who was meant to be seen. His name was Farrokh Bulsara, not yet the Freddie Mercury the world would one day worship. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich, he was just a dreamer selling second-hand clothes at Kensington Market by day, and rehearsing with a band that still hadn't found its sound by night. But what caught Mary's attention wasn't his flamboyance or ambition. It was something subtler, his warmth. He looked at her as if she were the most extraordinary person in the room, and for the first time she began to see herself through his eyes. Their first moments together were simple: cups of tea shared in tiny cafes, long walks through Kensington Gardens, and conversations that stretched deep into the night. Freddie talked about art, music, and dreams far too big for the small flats they both lived in. Mary listened, not because she understood everything, but because she believed in him. Friends would later recall how inseparable they became, finishing each other's sentences, laughing over nothing, moving through London like two souls who had somehow found each other in the chaos. She gave him something he didn't know he needed: stability, kindness, a quiet belief, and he gave her something she never expected: adventure, magic, and a glimpse into a world bursting with possibility. By the time Queen was beginning to take shape, the two were already living together in a cramped flat near Holland Road. Freddie would stay up late, his notebooks filled with lyrics, pages about love, fear, and longing. One of those songs, he told her, was for her. Its title, Love of My Life, Years later, in interviews, he admitted she was his greatest muse. All my lovers asked me why they couldn't replace Mary. He said softly, "It's simply impossible." While the press would one day paint him as untouchable, dazzling, larger than life, in those early years, Mary saw something different. She saw a shy, thoughtful man who doubted himself more than he ever let on. She saw both halves of him, the dreamer who reached for the stars and the quiet soul who needed someone to remind him that he was already enough. What bound them wasn't fame or desire, it was recognition. That strange, silent knowing when two people meet and realize they've known each other all along. It was a love born before money, before applause, before Freddie Mercury ever existed. By 1975, everything had changed. Bohemian Rhapsody had exploded across Britain, echoing through every radio, every concert hall, every heart that dared to dream. Almost overnight, Freddie Mercury became a star, dazzling, unpredictable, unstoppable. The tiny flat they once shared was replaced by tour buses, hotel rooms, and endless flashing cameras. Crowds screamed his name, tabloids devoured his every move, and fame, that intoxicating, merciless flame, began to burn at both ends. But amid all the noise, Mary was still there. She stayed grounded while the world spun faster around him. Yet even she could feel it. A distance is slowly forming between them, a quiet drift carried by something neither of them could name. Freddie was restless. He was discovering sides of himself he didn't yet understand. The man who once found comfort in her calm was now drawn to the chaos of the night. New friends, new temptations, new worlds that whispered promises of freedom. Mary sensed it before he spoke a word. Her intuition had always been sharper than his honesty. Then, one evening in their small shared flat, the truth finally surfaced. Freddie looked at her, eyes filled with conflict, and said quietly, "I think I'm bisexual." Mary paused, not in shock, but in clarity. Then she replied softly, "No, Freddie, I think you're gay." It was a moment that split their story in two. Painful, but honest. There were no tears, no accusations, just a long silence that carried both love and release. Soon after, they ended their romantic relationship, but not their bond. Freddie bought her a home close to his own and continued to call her his common-law wife. When journalists speculated about new lovers, he would remind friends, "Mary is the only person who truly understands me." While the world chased headlines, Mary remained steady. A quiet, unseen presence who refused to let fame redefine what they shared. Even as Freddie's life became louder, filled with parties, excess, and faces that changed by the week, she stayed. No jealousy, no demands, no need to compete. Behind the glitter and spotlight, he was still writing songs about her, still sending flowers every birthday, still calling when the weight of fame grew unbearable. It wasn't romance anymore. It was something deeper, a love stripped of illusion, a partnership that existed beyond category, beyond label, beyond explanation. Freddie once said, "All my lovers asked why they couldn't replace Mary." And he was right. None ever could. Because what they had wasn't built on passion. It was built on recognition, trust, and a kind of devotion that fame could never touch. Even as their paths diverged, one truth remained. When the noise of the world became too much, Freddie always found his way back to her. Even after their breakup, Mary's presence in Freddie Mercury's life never truly left. She was no longer his lover, yet somehow remained his constant. The one quiet figure untouched by the chaos of fame, While others came and went, Mary stayed, steady as the moon in Freddie's turbulent orbit. To the outside world, Freddie was a spectacle, a man of excess, wit, and outrageous charisma. But to Mary, he was still the same young man who once sang softly in a cramped apartment, chasing impossible dreams. She saw past the glitter, the feathers, the flashbulbs. She saw him. When Queen began selling out stadiums, redefining what rock could be, Freddie's life became a blur of music, parties, and performances. But behind every thunderous ovation was the same quiet ritual. He would call Mary, sometimes just to say goodnight, sometimes just to hear a familiar voice. He once told a journalist, "To me, she's my common-law wife, the only friend I trust completely." Those words weren't part of a performance, they were a confession, the truest thing he ever said in public. Extravagant on stage, meticulous in the studio, but private to his core, Freddie guarded his heart fiercely. Yet Mary had the key. She knew his doubts before he spoke them, his fears before he admitted them. Before every show, when he paced nervously backstage, she was often the voice that steadied him, reminding him who he was before the fame. And as the years passed, their bond deepened, not as lovers, but as something more sacred. It was a connection that refused to fade even when the world demanded a spectacle. When Freddie surrounded himself with new friends, new faces, and new pleasures, Mary didn't compete. She simply remained. A lighthouse standing quietly on the shore, guiding him home when he lost his way. He could walk through the doors of her home, sit down with a cup of tea, and drop the mask the world demanded of him. There, he wasn't Freddie Mercury, the icon. He was just Fred, the man who laughed too loudly, obsessed over his cats, and sang to her in half-finished melodies. Theirs was a love that had transformed, from passion to companionship, from desire to understanding. He may have lived surrounded by noise, but she was his silence, the place where he could breathe again. Even as the years carried him higher into fame, Freddie knew that every empire he built, every stage he conquered, would always lead back to her, the only person who loved him before the world ever did. By the early 1980s, Freddie Mercury was no longer just a rock star. He was a legend. His voice shook stadiums, his performances felt immortal, and his presence seemed larger than life. Yet behind the curtain, away from the deafening applause, he was growing quieter. The parties grew louder, the nights longer, and the headlines crueler. The press called him unstoppable. But Mary, who had seen the man behind the myth, knew better. She saw the fatigue behind the laughter, the loneliness behind the spotlight. Fame had given him everything except peace. Then came the whispers, rumors that spread through the music world like wildfire. The word AIDS appeared in tabloids, in backstage conversations, in fearful glances. Freddie didn't confirm it, he didn't deny it. He simply withdrew, retreating behind the high walls of Garden Lodge, the Kensington home he had filled with beauty, paintings, flowers, soft light, and the quiet hum of his piano. And through it all, Mary was there. She became his shield, his confidant, his caretaker. She answered calls, managed visitors, and protected him from the cruel curiosity of the outside world. Inside those walls, time slowed. There were no headlines, no cameras, no judgment, only music, laughter, and the fragile peace they had both longed for. Freddie still worked, still recorded, his body weakening, but his voice somehow burning brighter. When Queen released "The Show Must Go On," the world heard an anthem of defiance, but Mary knew it was more than that. It was his farewell, a message hidden in melody, a man singing against time itself. Visitors later said that the house felt sacred. Cats roamed freely, candles flickered in every corner, and Freddie, pale but serene, still managed to fill the room with warmth. Mary often brought him small gifts, fresh lilies, handwritten notes, candles that smelled of jasmine and cedar. She made sure meals were prepared, the garden tended, the silence peaceful. In those final months, words became rare. They didn't need them anymore. Sometimes they just sat together in silence, two people bound by memories that no one else could touch. When Freddie was too weak to move, Mary would read aloud to him or play old records they used to love, and every now and then he would smile. That same boyish smile from 1970, and whisper her name. By November 1991, his condition had worsened. Mary was among the last to see him conscious. She later said his words were gentle, filled with gratitude. He thanked her for staying, for protecting him, for never letting fame change what they had. She didn't cry, she simply held his hand, knowing that love sometimes means letting go. On November 24th, 1991, Freddie Mercury's voice fell silent. Outside, crowds gathered under the gray London sky, their candles flickering in the wind. Inside Garden Lodge, Mary made sure every detail of his final wishes was honored, quietly, respectfully, exactly as he wanted. For the world, it was the end of an era. For Mary, it was the loss of the only man who had ever truly seen her. When Freddie Mercury's will was read in early 1992, the world was stunned. He had left the majority of his estate, including Garden Lodge, his art, his possessions, and a large portion of his royalties, to Mary Austin. The tabloids erupted. Journalists speculated endlessly. Why her? Why not his bandmates or his later companions? But those who truly knew Freddie didn't question it for a second. He had made that choice long before he ever put it on paper. If things had been different, he once said, Mary would have been my wife. Everything I have belongs to her. For Freddie, it was never about money. It was about trust. And with that, trust came a responsibility only Mary could bear. He had asked her to guard his final resting place, to scatter his ashes privately, so that no one, not even his closest friends, would ever turn it into a spectacle. Rumors spread for years. Some said she buried them in the garden. Others claimed she scattered them over Lake Geneva. Mary never confirmed a single story. He wanted peace, she said simply, and I intend to give it to him. Even decades later, she refused to reveal the truth. It will always stay between us, she told one of her few interviewers, her voice steady but soft. And with those words, she sealed the final chapter of their story. A secret she would carry to her own grave. The responsibility weighed heavily on her. She hadn't just lost the man she loved. She had become the guardian of his memory. Every photograph, every letter, every note left on the piano became sacred. Museums offered fortunes for his belongings, but she turned them all down. The world saw possession, she saw promise. Reporters called her reclusive, some called her possessive. But those who visited Garden Lodge saw something else. Loyalty. The same loyalty that began in 1970 when a shy young man walked into a London boutique and saw her smile. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, as documentaries and films reimagined Freddie's story, Mary remained silent. She rarely appeared in public, refusing interviews, declining talk shows, never correcting the myths or exaggerations. Some things belong to the world, she once said, but some things should stay where he left them. Inside Garden Lodge, time stood still. The furniture remained untouched. The same photos lined the walls. The same piano gleamed beneath the same soft light. Visitors described the house as hauntingly beautiful, a shrine of love and memory. Fresh flowers were placed every week, Freddie's favorite lilies. She raised her 2 sons nearby, but kept his world separate from theirs. For her, Freddie's legacy wasn't a museum. It was a memory, a heartbeat she was sworn to protect. And now, at 73, Mary Austin finally speaks, not for fame, not for closure, but for truth. She wants the world to understand that Freddie Mercury's greatest story was never about excess or scandal or tragedy. It was about loyalty. The truth she reveals isn't a headline, it's a whisper, the kind that lingers long after the music fades. She reminds us that love, in its truest form, doesn't vanish. It endures quietly, through years, through loss, through every distorted memory the world tries to rewrite. Today, she still walks the gardens Freddie designed, the piano still gleams, the paintings still hang where he left them. Time has softened everything around her, but not the memory of him. The home, she once said, is both a gift and a burden, a reminder that love can last longer than a lifetime. And perhaps that is the truth she wanted to reveal all along, that Freddie Mercury's music may belong to the world, but his peace, his memory, his final promise belong only to her. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a vow whispered once and kept forever. The world remembers Freddie Mercury as a legend, a voice that could break glass, a performer who could command thousands with a single gesture. But behind that brilliance, behind the chaos and the crowns, there was always one constant, Mary Austin. She wasn't chasing fame nor holding on to ghosts. She was simply keeping a promise made long before the spotlight ever found them. While the world built monuments to his memory, she chose something quieter, something purer, to live each day as if he might walk back through the door, humming, smiling, alive. In her solitude, there's no bitterness, no regret, only a kind of peace that comes from knowing she did exactly what he asked of her. No more, no less. Freddie Mercury gave the world his music. Mary Austin gave him his peace. And together, even in silence, they built something immortal, a love that asked for nothing in return, yet endured beyond death itself. So when we speak of legends, of songs that never fade, remember this. Some of the most powerful stories aren't the ones shouted on stage. They're the ones whispered behind closed doors between 2 people who understood that love doesn't always need to be seen to be real. And maybe that's the truth Mary finally wanted us to know, that Freddie's greatest legacy wasn't just his voice, it was the love that survived it. Because sometimes love isn't loud, sometimes it's eternal. If this story touched you, take a moment to remember the quiet kind of love that outlives fame. Like, subscribe and stay with us for more forgotten stories of loyalty, loss, and the people who loved behind the curtain of Hollywood's brightest lights.